going over the integumentary system. So you should have your integumentary system note sheet open, and I'll go through this. Obviously, this is linked on Schoology, so if you missed something or want to rewatch a portion of it, it will be available for you. All right, so basically DQ3 for melanin is really all about the integumentary system. This is our human body system for this storyline. It's the only system, and this objective, the last objective for this DQ is really all about the integumentary system. So that's kind of what this slideshow is about. And let's go ahead and get started. So, main structures and functions. Integumentary system is your skin, hair, nails, and then of course the associated glands and things that are in the skin. Those are the actual parts. You can see that the skin, in terms of surface area, is considered the largest organ of your body. Hair, the job of hair, there's a couple of jobs, but obviously it insulates the body in some locations. In places like your nasal cavities, it traps foreign bodies that are trying to enter. Your eyelashes are there to try to protect foreign bodies from getting into your eyes. So hair has kind of a lot of different functions. It's composed of dead keratin-filled cells. So keratin is protein, kind of a tough protein that is really the main protein of the skin and the integumentary system itself. The hair and the nails are going to be both made of that tough protein. Nails, again, protect the ends of your fingers and toes. I think that's pretty common sense, but they grow from cells that are constantly dividing as part of what's called the nail root. Again, these are basically keratin. Now, whereas hair is mostly keratin-filled cells, nails are really just mostly keratin. The cells have obviously already died, and all that's kind of left is the keratin itself. So when you're talking about the functions of the integumentary system, it's obviously the skin acts as a barrier, a physical barrier against foreign things to try to protect you. It also acts as a barrier for things like ultraviolet radiation. We've talked about melanin, we've talked about albinism, and that is a chemical that absorbs ultraviolet radiation to try and protect your DNA and your cells below your skin. It helps retain all of your body fluids, so that keeps, I think most of us know that we're mostly water, and the skin acts as kind of an insulation for that. It does have some functions to get rid of waste. When you sweat, you actually get rid of a lot of salt in that when in the liquid that makes up your sweat. There is some exchange of gases through the skin, but not much. And it does help regulate your body temperature, maintaining homeostasis. This is why your cheeks get rosy red, both when you're hot and cold. But it's constantly regulating body temperature by opening and closing the capillaries, which are really close to your skin's surface. When you get really, really hot, those capillaries open up and the blood gets closer to your skin, which helps then, release heat into the environment. The sweat also does that through evaporation. So, when you get hot, you start sweating. That evaporation process pulls heat out of your body. The other works too, like, if your skin starts getting really cold, the blood, which holds a lot of heat, will get close to the surface. This is why your cheeks get red, both when, your cheeks are cold, but also, when you're hot, like when you're running around. So skin is all about layers, and layers within layers, and we're talking about like the epidermis. But there's basically three main layers of your skin. Epidermis is the outer layer, and then you have dermis, which is directly under the epidermis, and the subcutaneous. And we're not gonna really focus much on the subcutaneous, but that's the bottom layer of the skin, sometimes called the hypodermis. Hypo meaning below dermis. So you've got, your dermis, and then below your dermis. Sometimes you'll see in diagrams, maybe even in the book, it'll call it the hypodermis, but that's the subcutaneous layer. Those are the same thing. We'll start with the epidermis. Epidermis is basically several layers of skin cells that are becoming more and more flattened as they move out to your outer skin. I'm going to show you a diagram here coming up, but these are basically epithelial cells. Epithelial cells are specific types of cells that cover surfaces. And within these cells, sometimes they're called keratinoids because they produce that protein called keratin, which is the major protein produced in skin cells, which gives it kind of that rigid and rough appearance. It also makes them waterproof, and that's kind of the purpose of the skin, is to be that barrier. The top layers, so the edge of your skin, so what you would touch with your fingers, is basically mostly dead cells that are constantly being shed. This is, if you think about like a snake sheds its skin all at once, we shed our skin in teeny tiny pieces that obviously blow off into the environment. I can't remember the exact percentage, but dust is mostly made up of dead skin cells, which is kind of gross when you think about it. But that's what the majority of dust is made up of. Now, these are basically, like, where do they come from? Well, at the lower levels of your epidermis, you've got rapidly dividing cells, and they keep pushing the cells above them upward. And as it does that, it gets crushed, flattening them out. It's also, there's no actual blood vessels in your epidermis. So there's no nutrients or oxygen being delivered to these cells, which is why as they move farther and farther away from the lower levels of the epidermis, they eventually die because there's no way to get they have no way to get nutrients or oxygen. And that's kind of all part of it. In the epidermis, in the lower layers of the epidermis, this is where melanin is produced. It's produced by a special cell called a melanocyte. This is that pigment that absorbs radiation, ultraviolet radiation, to try and protect the DNA in the lower living cells in the dermis. So dermis is directly below the epidermis. It is just a single thick layer. So the epidermis is made up of 5 different layers, which we'll get to. But the dermis is just a single layer. Within this single layer, you have several specialized structures that you do need to know their functions, but also need to be able to label them. These include sensory neurons. Sensory, so think like senses. These are basically nerves. They're nerve cells that send signals from the outside environment to your brain. So this is how you feel with your skin. If you feel something's hot, or if something touches you, that's going to send that information to your brain for analysis. There are blood vessels that are also in this layer. So when you get a cut, if you're not bleeding, that means it only cut the epidermis. But if there's blood coming out, you've reached the dermis, because blood vessels are in this layer. You also have muscle fibers. I'll show them to you on the picture here in a minute, but these muscle fibers are attached to the hair follicles, and their job is to push the hair up and out. This is what gives you goosebumps. Now, the reason you still have, this is almost like a vestigial structure. because it's kind of like, well, what does that do for us? Like when you get cold or frightened, these muscle fibers contract. Well, when we were covered in fur, what this did is it basically it pushes the fur up, makes it stand on end, which traps air under the fur, which keeps you warm. It also, like, why does that happen for being when you're frightened? Like, why do you get goosebumps when you get nervous or excited? Um, it makes you look bigger, so it wards off predators. You probably, maybe if you have a dog, you know that like the hair stands up on end. It's the same thing. That's what's happening, is those muscle fibers are contracting that are attached to the hair follicles, causing the hair to be pushed up and straight. Um, the hair follicles are also in this layer, which is basically a cluster of cells that are constantly producing keratin, which is hair, the hair strand. And you also have several different glands in this. The two major glands that you're going to want to know are the sebaceous glands and the sweat glands, which sometimes are referred to as the sudoriferous glands. Well, not sometimes referred to it, but that's the more technical name of a sweat gland, is the sudoriferous gland. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. So glands. You've got exocrine glands. Exocrine glands are basically the two types you need to know are sweat glands and oil glands. So exocrine glands are like the category of gland, and these release secretions. Sweat glands, which are called sudoriferous glands, are releasing kind of a mixture of water, salt, and urea. That its main function is to help regulate body temperature. So the sweat pours out onto the skin surface through pores, and then when that sweat evaporates, it helps remove heat from the body. The water itself carries a lot of heat, but it also, the evaporation process cools the body down as well. A secondary function here is that salt and urea are waste products, so being able to get rid of that kind of is like a bonus. Obviously we get rid of salt other ways as well, but this is another way to do that. And it kind of has a third function, because that salt and urea are usually it creates a pretty inhospitable environment. So that pours out onto your skin surface. This is why our skin tastes salty. It makes a very salty environment on our skin surface, as well as an acidic environment with the urea. This really limits the ability of microorganisms to grow and colonize our skin. This prevents infection, prevents invaders. So there's a lot of maybe hidden functions when you're talking about sweat. Oil glands are attached directly to hair follicles. It's one of the easiest ways when you're looking at a picture to be able to figure out which one the oil glands are and which one the sweat glands are. Oil glands are going to be attached directly to hair follicles, because oil glands, which are called sebaceous glands, because they produce a substance called sebum, which is a fatty substance or kind of an oily substance, and that oil coats the hair as it grows out of the follicle. And what that sebum does then is it spills out over the surface of your skin, which waterproofs your skin. It also makes our skin soft. It's why our skin is soft versus a reptile skin feels leathery. The sebum itself is also it's fat, so it is a food source, and a lot of bacteria like to eat that. Which is what, when it gets dirty and the pores get clogged, the bacteria start to feast on that sebum, and that of course causes pimples, which is why maybe some of you have experience in how like taking antibiotics can actually help clear up pimples, and why a lot of people say like don't pop pimples, because you're kind of spreading the bacteria around, which then of course causes more pimples. So that all comes from the oil glands. All right, we're not going to talk much about the subcutaneous layer. Just a quick little blurb here, but basically it's mostly made up of a tissue known as adipose tissue, which is fat tissue. there's a couple of functions when you're talking about the subcutaneous layer. It's obviously there. We talked about fat as a way to store energy, so it's a place to kind of store extra energy in case we ever need it. Why is it stored where it is? Why is it stored in your integumentary system? Because fat is an insulator, so it does keep you warm. It also is, squishy. So it's like shock absorbing, which protects organs inside your body. So here's the kind of the picture I was referring to. Now in the video that I have, you're going to see the different layers here of the epidermis. It's going to go into a little bit more detail on that. My suggestion, even though we don't really test you on these layers, it might be a good idea to at least understand that there are several layers in the epidermis, so that the whole integumentary system kind of makes a little bit more sense. But here's your epidermis. Again, that's the layer of the outer layer of your skin. Again, there are 5 layers, and in what's called the thick skin. Thick skin is in your palms and in your soles of your feet. There's only 4 in like everywhere else. There's actually a mnemonic. There's a different mnemonic actually in the video you're going to see. I've never actually heard that one, but it's "Come, let's get sunburn" is kind of the mnemonic. You've got and it'll go through the different groups. So I'll let the video kind of cover that. It's not something we're going to test you on, but C, L, G, S, B are your 5 layers. So it'll go through that. All right, let's focus more on the dermis, because you will have to label a picture like this. So what are the things you're going to have to label? You're going to have to label the epidermis, right? So you'll have something like this where it'll have the 3 layers, okay? Top layer is epidermis, middle layer is the dermis, bottom layer is the hypodermis, or sometimes referred to as a subcutaneous layer. All right, so within the dermis, you have several different parts. These are nerves. You can always kind of tell because they almost look like roots as they branch out. So these are your nerves. These are your sensory nerves that go all the way up to here, and they have little pressure sensor cells on them that when something touches. So some of them are designed for pressure. So when something touches, it compresses that cell, which then sends a nerve impulse down and then off to your brain. Some of these, so those are like tactile cells that are like the pressure sensors. Then there's also heat sensing cells, so that you can kind of feel and sense heat on your surface of your skin. So those are the nerve cells. Red is always going to be, obviously blood cells coming in here. So they're again, if you take a look, they don't go into the epidermis. They're only located in the dermis, and these blood vessels run obviously throughout. This is also why, so like at the bottom layer here is where the layers of cells are being produced as they're pushed up toward the surface of the skin. And as more and more cells, if this is the layer, this is known as the basal layer. It's the B in "Come, let's get sunburn." So the basal layer here is what's constantly reproducing, and it's just pushing these cells up and up and up and up. And the farther they get up, the farther away from the blood vessels they are, which is why they die. So, but that's kind of their function. So kind of moving back down into here, you've got your hair follicle. Most students don't miss that. The hair follicle is this layer of cells here, okay, that produces the hair. Sometimes it's referred to as the hair shaft that comes out. And again, here is the sebaceous gland. Remember I told you the one that's located on the hair is going to produce sebum. This is the sebum that as the hair grows, it passes by this, gets coated in that oil, which moves up and out. The other gland that you're looking for, the sudoriferous gland or the sweat gland, is right here. This is a sweat pore to the surface, so that's kind of the way to tell the difference between the 2 glands. The one that's all by itself is the sweat gland, and the one that's by the hair is going to be the sebaceous gland. And you might be wondering, like, what's this blue thing? Well, that's the other part of the blood vessel, right? So the blood vessel, remember, red and blue that we did in circulatory system. Red is oxygenated, drops off its oxygen, and then becomes blue. Now it's high in carbon dioxide. It's going to head back to the heart to pick up more oxygen from the lungs. All right. I have a video for you that's going to cover a lot of this again. Sit back. It's going to go in a little bit more detail, specifically with the epidermis, with those layers. Hopefully ties it all together for you, also labels some more things for you. And then after you're done with that, then you're going to be moving on to the activity for today, which is the how we get our skin color activity. And after you're done with that, then that's the day. So, all right, here we go.
Pele. Outra coisa é uma longa lista de coisas que as amebas não têm, mas admiro muito, porque a pele, que é o seu maior órgão, é notável.
All right, hold on. Let's do something a little different. That's hysterical. Somehow I downloaded the Spanish version of that video. Let's play it right from YouTube. How about that? So, let's see. Amoeba Sisters YouTube Integumentary System. There you go. We'll play it right from here. I don't know how I did that.
Skin. Another thing on a long list of things that amoebas don't have, but greatly admire because skin, which is your largest organ, is remarkable. Being the largest organ, it's very fitting that it's part of a system with a very long word, integumentary system. Skin and structures associated with it make up the integumentary system. Why do we admire skin so much? Well, skin is critical for homeostasis because it helps maintain internal body temperatures and fluid balance. It's a physical barrier. It protects your internal structures and organs from being damaged. It protects from invasion of pathogens like bacteria or fungi, for example. Skin is where vitamin D is produced. Skin also has sensory functions. For example, if a ladybug lands on your arm, you're usually aware of it. The integumentary system, which includes skin, has some depth to it. This system has layers of different tissues and cell types, and you'll find major layers can be divided into smaller layers as well. We're going to take a little exploration of this, and a reminder, this is a general exploration. We're going to start with the epidermis. First, I want to mention cells that can be found in different locations in the epidermis, called keratinocytes. These are cells that make keratin. Keratin is actually a protein that helps cells be water resistant and tough. Keratinocytes are produced at the bottom layer of the epidermis, which we'll get to on our tour, and they get pushed upward to the top, superficial layer of the epidermis, where they are considered cornified. Cornified cells are hardened, flattened, and tough. They're also dead. They've lost their organelles and they are just full of keratin. Now, before we start exploring the layers of the epidermis, I think it's really helpful to have a mnemonic to remember the different layers of the epidermis, from the outer layer to the inner layer. Here's an epidermis mnemonic. Can lemurs get some bamboo? I may or may not have made that mnemonic up, and there are probably better ones out there, but many lemurs do like bamboo. Something to be said for factual mnemonics. The first letter in each word stands for each epidermal layer, which will be called a stratum, which we'll get to now. Outer top layer, we've got the stratum corneum. This layer consists of cornified cells, dead cells. They are continuously shed off with replacement cells coming from layers below. Now the next layer down, the stratum lucidum. It's not in all skin areas. It's generally just for thick skin areas like the bottom of your feet or on your palms. This layer also consists of cornified cells. They contain a type of protein that gives them a transparent kind of appearance, hence the name of this layer. Next, stratum granulosum. In this particular layer, keratinocytes that have been pushed from the lower layer will develop a flatter structure in this layer. They contain granules, like the name of the layer suggests, that have a variety of functions. The keratinocytes here will eventually lose their organelles and become the cornified cells of the layers above. Next, stratum spinosum. There are many layers of keratinocytes here, but there's also a type of cell that will consume worn-out cells or bacteria, and by doing so, it acts like a macrophage. By the way, the name of this layer is related to how the layer looks under the microscope when it's stained. The layer looks spiny when stained. Now, the deepest layer of the epidermis, the stratum basale. The stratum basale consists of one layer of cells called basal cells. These cells are the ones constantly doing mitosis and actually give rise to the keratinocytes in the layers above. Interesting fact, do you have especially thick skin on your feet or maybe on a finger? This could be a callus. Calluses generally form when the stratum basale layer is trying to respond to frequent abrasions by making more cells, which mature and result in a thicker stratum corneum. The stratum basale also has other types of cells, like melanocytes. This is the cell that makes a protein called melanin. Melanin is a pigment that can result in an array of different skin colors, and melanin protects the skin from being damaged by ultraviolet rays. The melanin actually gets transported to the keratinocytes in organelles called melanosomes. Merkel cells are another cell type, and while their exact function is a bit uncertain, check out our further reading links on that, they are thought to have involvement with the nervous system in working with nerves to help us have the sense of touch. The stratum basale layer of the epidermis will be bonded to the dermis, which we'll move into right now. The dermis. Unlike the epidermis, you will find blood vessels in the dermis. The dermis is a type of connective tissue, which is a non-epidermal type of tissue that connects things together in the body. You'll also find sweat glands, hair follicles, and nerves in the dermis. The dermis has fibers of two types of protein, collagen, providing support, and elastin, which gives elasticity. These proteins are made by specialized cells in this layer called fibroblasts. The dermis has two general layers, a papillary layer, which has connective tissue that is more loose, and a deeper reticular layer, where connective tissue is more tightly packed. Now, before we move to one more layer, this is a good time to mention scars. Many cuts that are isolated to the epidermis won't scar, but if a cut makes it to the dermis, it can often scar. Scars tend to look different from the rest of the skin because they aren't put together exactly like the original skin was. What I mean by that is that when the fibroblasts are generating collagen to fix the damage, they tend to not arrange it in the pattern that had originally been there before. And accessory structures that we'll get to later, like sweat glands or hair, won't be recreated there. Scar tissue also can have less elasticity, meaning really large scars from really large wounds can even affect range of movement. And occasionally, the collagen production keeps on going, even after everything is healed. And that could result in a raised scar that could be referred to as a keloid. That's from this excessive producing of collagen. Okay, moving on to the last layer we'll discuss, the hypodermis. It's under the dermis, and it connects the skin above to bone and muscle tissue. The hypodermis contains adipose tissue, which is stored body fat, and this has important functions such as insulation. Now, after looking at the layers, there are accessory structures that are part of the integumentary system that we haven't mentioned. Sweat glands, for example. We talked about sweat glands in our homeostasis video and how important they are for cooling the body. We should point out that sweat glands aren't the only ways that your skin can help with temperature regulation. Blood vessels in your dermis will dilate, meaning widen, so that heat can escape through the skin. And if you're really cold, those same blood vessels will now constrict and be kept away from the surface of the skin so that heat can be conserved. Sebaceous glands are another accessory structure. They produce oil and help keep the skin and hair waterproof. They also help lubricate all those dead keratinocytes that we've been talking about. Hair, remember which layer we said had hair follicles? That's right, the dermis. There are cells that are found in this hair bulb that are doing mitosis rapidly, and when they do, the cells get pushed outward as the hair root grows. The hair shaft that you see itself is made of keratin and non-living. Nails. The base of your nail is part of the epidermis, while the nail body, that portion that protects the ends of the fingers and toes, is made of dead keratinocytes. The nail root has cells that are doing mitosis frequently, and as those cells get pushed outward, they help the nail grow. So we always like to mention the why. Why learn about the integumentary system? Well, first of all, we do want to mention that skin cancer, which according to the American Academy of Dermatology is the most common cancer in the United States, can occur when some of the integumentary cells we've been talking about start to not function correctly and divide out of control. For example, basal cells can also give rise to the most common type of skin cancer in humans, the basal cell carcinoma. Melanocytes can give rise to a type of skin cancer called melanoma. Merkel cells can give rise to an aggressive rare type of cancer called Merkel cell carcinoma. It is by understanding and studying the integumentary system that we can better understand how to treat these types of skin cancers. In continuing to emphasize how important the functions of the integumentary system are, let's consider a condition where the functions can be compromised. such as a burn. The degree of a burn tends to be placed in a type of category, depending on which levels are affected. I do want to point out, though, that we've noticed classification of burn degrees are not consistent across all sources. Check out our further reading to learn more. If going on a system that recognizes 4 different classification categories of a burn, a first-degree burn generally is isolated to the epidermis, a second-degree burn affects the epidermis and part of the dermis, a third-degree burn affects the epidermis and all of the dermis, and a fourth-degree burn goes beyond these layers to even affect bones and muscles. In third and fourth-degree burns, the nerves are typically damaged, so it can actually feel less painful despite being more severe of a burn. Significant burns can be dangerous because those functions we talked about with the skin, like maintaining fluids and protecting all the internal structures, that function is compromised with a significant burn. In addition, the skin is now very vulnerable to getting infected, so that needs to be addressed. There are medical personnel trained to work specifically with burns, and they have to have extensive knowledge of the integumentary system in order to make a treatment plan and restore the integumentary system so that it can do all those amazing functions we've mentioned. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
All right.
Largest organ, it's very...
That's the video. Let's go ahead and back out of there. So now what you're going to do is go ahead and open up the activity and finish that, and then you'll be all set for the day. All right.